Welcome. Today we're going to focus on an introduction to biology, chapter 1, and in this video we'll look at the 5 themes in biology that we're going to see again and again as we study biology. So there are 5 themes that we see when we study biology. One of them is that biology is organized in a hierarchy, or there is hierarchical organization in biology. That means vertical organization. We can study biology from many different levels. So here we've got a picture of a couple of my kids and me in the front yard with a monarch. We could look at the organism called a monarch butterfly and ask questions about it. How does it fly from Grand Rapids, Michigan, all the way down to Mexico? How many eggs does it lay? How does it, what does it eat? Those kinds of things. If we were studying the organism, we might say, okay, we're studying biology at the organismal level. Here's a picture of a lupine plant, but we can imagine a monarch there too. Now you could study more than just the organism. You could look at populations of monarchs and ask questions about competition between individuals, or how diseases are spread, or competition for shelter, or for egg-laying sites, or for mates. Those kinds of questions would be population questions. We could look at the community in which the monarchs live, the organisms that surround them, and ask, what kind of animals, or what kind of animals prey upon monarchs. We could look at the foods that our monarchs are eating. What kind of plants do they eat? We could look at other aspects of the community as a whole. Are diseases spread from from species to species? Or we could look even bigger at ecosystems and the biosphere, looking at the interactions between the living world and the non-living world. So how do things like temperature and soils and wind and weather play a part in the lives of monarchs? Or we could go and look inside the organism at the organs or the tissues that make up the organism. So we're interested in why monarchs are so good at flying all the way down to Mexico. We might look at their musculature, and we may look at even at the cellular level, what's happening, what kind of muscle, what do their muscle cells look like, what types and how many mitochondria do they have that fuel the flight of the monarch. We might even look at the molecules that make up the organelles, that make up the cells. I did most of my research looking at populations. I studied a small fish and looked at how learning plays a role in courtship behavior in that fish. So I was mostly at the population or organismal or community level. And we know that structure and function are correlated across biological levels. Form fits function. So when we think of something like our digestive tract, the form of our digestive tract fits with its function. For people for animals like us, we have kind of a variety of teeth, for example, some for tearing and ripping and some for grinding. We have, because we eat a variety of foods. But bison eat primarily grasses, and their teeth are modified to, be big molars, big grinding surfaces. We can look at the length of our digestive tract. Animals that are carnivores have shorter digestive tracts than animals who are herbivores, because eating plant food is difficult. It's difficult to digest and absorb, and it takes more small and large intestine to do it. We're going to see that structure and function is correlated across all sorts of things. One of the things that we're going to focus on are cells and their parts, and we'll realize that the parts of a cell, the way that they're structured, like the way that the lysosome is structured, is going to fit with what it does. And that leads us to the fact that when we look at this vertical or hierarchical organization, the basic units of structure and function are the cells, and we'll spend a lot of time on those. Second theme, information. DNA is the heritable information for all living things, from bacteria to fungi to plants to animals to everything. We're going to spend a lot of time thinking about DNA. We will look at its structure, how it replicates itself before a cell can divide. We will focus on how it codes for, in some way, the traits that we have and how those traits can be passed from parent to offspring, and how it codes for the building of proteins. We'll look at how DNA is transcribed and translated. A third theme that you see in biology is that life involves the transfer and transformation of energy and matter. In this picture, you see how light energy is being converted to chemical energy, to sugar, in this milkweed plant. The milkweed then can use that sugar and convert that sugar into mass as it grows, right? Other animals can use that mass as well and can convert the plant growth into energy for its own growth or energy for its own movement. All of this involves transfer and transformation. We're going to focus on photosynthesis and cellular respiration in this semester, so we're going to be thinking about the transfer and transformation of energy. Fourth, interactions are important in biological systems. Organisms interact with each other. Even organelles interact with each other when we look at the cellular level. But here's a picture of a moose interacting with its environment. Obviously, it's eating some vegetation, but there's probably a lot more interactions going on here than you can see. There are probably parasites living on that moose that are maybe sucking its blood. Inside the moose, there are certainly mutualistic relationships the moose has with probably bacteria that live in its gut so that it can digest cellulose or digest the plant food more easily, and the bacteria are gaining a nice home. There are lots of interactions that we're going to see in biology. And then fifth, evolution explains the diversity and unity that we see in biology. So let's think about diversity and unity, and then think about how evolution explains both of those. There's an incredible diversity of life out there. I love it, right? There are probably around 10 million different species of living things. We've named and identified maybe 1.8 million. You can check them out if you want to on the Tree of Life. It's a pretty cool site. There's tons of diversity. Back in the 1700s, Linnaeus came up with a way to classify that diversity. Linnaeus said, all right, let's group organisms by what they look like. And he grouped them into plants and animals, and then he grouped them into smaller and smaller categories. And he gave every single organism a two-part name, a binomial name. It's called the binomial nomenclature, right? The name includes the organism's genus and species. So humans are called Homo sapiens. Bison actually have the genus bison and the species name bison. So they have the bison name. Today, we use Linnaeus's ideas, but we have also pay more attention to how evolution, or the evolutionary relationships between organisms as we group them. And so we've grouped them now into 3 different domains of life. This is kind of the biggest category or biggest grouping. The 3 domains here are shown in bold: the archaea, the eukaryota, and the bacteria. The eukaryota include organisms whose cells are eukaryotes, cells that are more complex. They have membrane-bound organelles, and they include things that you're very familiar with, like all the plants you see around us. The animals, fungi fall into this category, and protists, these mostly single-celled organisms, right? So we fall into the eukaryotes. And then there are 2 categories the archaea and the bacteria that are made up of prokaryotic cells, the more simple cells. The archaea and the bacteria used to be lumped together, but today we recognize that their structure is quite different from each other, and they seem to be evolutionarily separated. So we put them in two different domains. Okay, so there's a lot of diversity, but is there unity in this diversity? You bet. The unity in the moss that you see, or the fungus, or this banana slug, or sea anemone, includes things like cell structure. You know, most of these organisms have very similar cell structures and metabolism. So when we look at cellular respiration, it's in almost everything. And even more, DNA. DNA is the information, or the heritable information, that all organisms possess. So there's a lot of unity. Now this fifth theme says that evolution explains both the unity and the diversity that we see in biology. How does it do that? Well, Darwin actually used the phrase descent with modification instead of evolution most of the time. And the basic idea is there's unity in all of this diversity that we see because we share a common ancestor. And when we share common ancestry, we carry some of the same structural features. But why is there diversity then? There's diversity because over time Darwin recognized that a change happens, that selection occurs, that mutations can occur, that change happens, and organisms separate or diversify from each other. Even though they share a common ancestor, there's still lots of diversity. Evolution. By the way, does anybody know Darwin's mechanism for the descent with modification? He came up with a mechanism for evolution. Natural selection. You bet. That's it for now. Those are the 5 themes that we're going to see in biology.